to share why cooperative learning accelerates language learning. Years ago, an experiment was done by Liz Cohn at Stanford and her associates, in which they had students working together on science projects using cooperative learning. And their primary interest was whether it accelerated achievement in science. But she had limited English proficient students paired on teams with proficient English students. And as a kind of aside, they also measured language acquisition. And they were shocked because when the results came in, as always, cooperative learning did better than traditional as far as science acquisition. But what surprised them was the grade equivalent scores in language acquisition were actually greater than science. And they had no instruction in language. So the kids were learning English language without being taught English language. Why? Because they were doing cooperative learning. Cooperative learning accelerates language acquisition for three main reasons. Because of the variables called input, output, and context. And I want to talk to you about each. As far as input goes, the research is very clear. We don't learn language unless we have comprehensible input, unless we understand what's being said to us. Then we acquire those words and those concepts and those phrases. If somebody says to you, "Gleich," and you don't understand what they're talking about, and they say "Gleich" louder, trying to make themselves understood, you still don't know. But if at the same time they point to a book and say "Gleich," oh, and then you might say, point to another book and say "Gleich," and they say "Gleich." You've got it. It was all comprehensible because of the context. And cooperative learning provides that context. When kids are working together, they say, "Pass me this," or "It's your turn." And as they hear those phrases associated with actions and objects, they acquire that language because it's comprehensible. The second variable is output. We don't become fluent in a language if we don't speak that language. And cooperative learning allows a dramatic increase in the amount of language output. In the traditional classroom, the teacher calls on students one at a time to answer the teacher's questions. Well, if you want to give every student in a class of 30 a minute, it's going to take 30 minutes, calling on them one at a time. But really, it takes over an hour because the teacher talks twice for each time the students talk. The teacher has to ask the question and then has to respond to the answer. So kids get on an average in the traditional question and answer 1 minute of language output an hour if the teacher divides it equally, which she doesn't, calling more often on the more fluent ones. So many kids go the whole hour without speaking at all. Now, if we want to give a minute of language output to students using one of the Kagan structures like Rally Robin, it only takes 2 minutes. A, you share, B, you share, A, you share, B, you share, and after 2 minutes, everybody's had a minute. Or in a time pair share, A, you have a minute, B, you have a minute. In 2 minutes, in terms of language output, we do what the traditional teacher takes over an hour to do. In fact, the traditional structure is exquisitely designed to prevent language output. They're spending most all of the time looking at the back of the head of somebody talking to the teacher. Now, in terms of the last variable, context, we know a lot about the brain. And we know that when there's any threat whatsoever, any fear whatsoever, the amygdala in the brain fires, sending inhibitory impulses to the prefrontal cortex and shuts it down. It's like before you go into a test, a really important test, and a lot hinges on it, and you say to yourself, "I can't even think straight, I'm so nervous." That's amygdala firing, shutting down the prefrontal cortex. Well, for a limited English proficient student to answer in front of the whole class, that's scary. risking embarrassment, and that's why kids in general, talking before the class, often clam up. The amygdala fire shuts down the ability to produce language and ideas and fluency. It's so different in a cooperative learning class. We've done team building, class building, and now I'm sharing with just one other person, not in front of the whole class. And that one other person is a supportive context. If I don't know the word, they help me with it. In a traditional classroom, the teacher has a dilemma. Should I speak to the high language proficient kids and lose the lows, or should I speak to the lows and bore the highs? Impossible dilemma. But in cooperative learning, the kids are talking to each other, and if a kid doesn't understand, the other ones negotiate meaning. They say it a different way. They make it comprehensible. So it's a win for input reasons, for output reasons, and for the supportive context. Cooperative learning accelerates language acquisition.